Debian 12 Bookworm will be released in a few days, and Debian stable is generally more associated with servers than with Linux desktops. After all, it does use a lot of older packages, applications, and desktop environments. But in the current Linux world, an older base can actually be an advantage and isn't as limiting as it once was, which means Debian 12 can actually be a very good solution for your Linux desktop. So let's look at everything new in Debian 12, at a bunch of reasons why you might want to give it a shot on your desktop, and at this segue to our sponsor. This video is sponsored by TuxCare. They offer a range of services to ensure your Linux server and workstation fleet stay up to date, secure, and supported, with kernel life patching, extended support for end-of-life distributions, and commercial support for Alma Linux. And if this range of services is something that interests you and you want to be kept up to date, then you can subscribe to their newsletter. They will only send you email twice a month, so you won't get spammed. And they offer news and insights about cybersecurity, vulnerability management, Linux, and open source news. So if you want to be kept in the loop about all of this, click the link in the description below and subscribe to TuxCare's newsletter. So let's begin with a very quick rundown of Debian 12. So Debian 11 was released in August 2021, so about 2 years ago. Debian 12 is the latest update to Debian stable, and it will release at the end of this week. And it's still one of, if not the most stable Linux distribution you can find, and it's tested to perfection. It will get 3 years of support plus 2 extra years of LTS support, which is handled by volunteers and not by the Debian security team. So it's basically like an Ubuntu LTS, except it's way less opinionated, which can be a good or bad thing depending on your stance on snaps, Ubuntu, and canonical in general. Wait, did I just compare Debian to Ubuntu? I might get assassinated for this. If I die, all my stuff goes to my girlfriend's cat. So, to begin with, Debian 12 moves away from its pure free and open source roots. They used to ship a completely FOSS install experience without any non-free firmware or drivers included, which meant that for a lot of people, installing Debian could be a pain, as your Wi-Fi and Bluetooth card and your GPU might not work at all out of the box, and your CPU might not be used to the fullest. Debian 12 takes a more pragmatic stance and now enables the non-free firmware repo by default if Debian detects you will need it on your computer. This obviously makes installing Debian way easier with hardware support on par with any other distro. And before you start screaming that Debian betrayed the free and open source community, just know that you can disable all that with a command line argument at boot. You're not forced to use non-free software. Although if you don't want to waste your PC's potential, you probably will want to leave that enabled. Debian 12 actually splits non-free software into 2 different repos. Non-free, which is for packages and apps that don't conform to Debian's guidelines on free and open source software, and non-free firmware, which is the same thing, but specifically for drivers and firmware. And this in itself makes Debian 12 way more suitable for a desktop, because it basically removes a lot of the hoops that users had to jump through to actually get a fully working computer. The installer is still the same old thing, which doesn't look modern with its old buttons and font rendering and its weird colors. It's basically Windows 98 style, but it's pretty powerful, with easy separate/home partition options and the ability to pick whatever desktop environment you want and some more advanced features. It is not super user-friendly, but it's not horrible either. It's very legible and easy to understand. It just looks old, which still might scare some people away. Now, Debian isn't generally known for shipping the very latest and greatest desktop environments, but Debian 12 isn't far off. You get a choice between KDE Plasma, GNOME, Cinnamon, XFCE, Mate, LXDE, LXQt, or even a GNOME flashback session, which is modern GNOME that sort of looks like GNOME 2. For Plasma users, you get the very latest KDE 5.27, with all its bug fixes and updates, which means you're not missing out on any Wayland support. You get the new Welcome Tour to help you set up some KDE hidden features, you get the improved Discover App Store, a much better Krunner search, more calendars being supported, and the full overhaul of multi-monitor support and the new tiling mode. And since Plasma 6 will probably not release for another 6 months, you can be secure in knowing that you're using the latest and greatest and will be for a while. And now is the mandatory self-promotion. If you want to know everything new about KDE 5.27, my video is in the link in the description below. Now, if you were using Debian 11, you were using KDE 5.20. So you're jumping a full 7 versions ahead, which means your experience will be drastically better, whatever your use case is. If you're a GNOME user, you will get GNOME 43, which is not the latest, but GNOME 44 wasn't a huge update by any means. The only things you'll be missing out on are the Backgrounds Apps feature, which for now doesn't really provide any crucial functionality. The expandable tree view in the file manager, the image thumbnails in the file picker, and a slight improvement to the quick settings, notably for Bluetooth. It is not a huge deal. GNOME 43 is still relevant and absolutely usable. I still use it on my desktop with Fedora 37, because migrating to Fedora 38 would create some issues with DaVinci Resolve. So yeah, it's not a bad desktop and you can still keep using it. And if you want to know everything new in GNOME 43 or what you'll be missing out on from GNOME 44, I left a link to both of my videos on these versions in the description as well. Now, if you were using Debian 11, you were on GNOME 3.38, which means you'll get a whole 4 new versions worth of features, support, performance improvements, and basically you will migrate from GTK 3 to GTK 4. It means you can now reliably use Wayland if you want, and your apps and desktop are going to be a hell of a lot smoother and more responsive. Now, Debian 12 also brings Cinnamon 5.6 and XFCE 4.18, which are both the latest. Cinnamon 5.8 will be released with Mint 21.2 in a few weeks, but Cinnamon doesn't generally add that many huge new features, so you can rest comfortably knowing your experience is definitely up to date enough. As per XFCE, the next version 4.20, nice. That version is still in early development and won't come out until 2024. So here again, you're not missing out on anything. Which means that the desktop experience on Debian 12 is still absolutely relevant. Sure, you will not be getting all the updates coming up for the next years until Debian 13 releases. But I'd say that in 2023, that's not as big of a problem as it once was. Linux desktop environments are very mature. We're not in the same position as even a year ago, where you absolutely needed the latest update because stuff was buggy or incomplete. Nowadays, updates are more refinements than crucial improvements, so being stuck on a desktop environment for a year or two isn't as much of a problem in 2023 as it once was. And I know I previously said that Pop! OS 22.04 was getting too old to be suitable to be my desktop, so you're probably preparing a mean comment saying that I'm a Debian paid shill? Man, I wish I had that Debian money. But the truth is, I'm not the average user. I look at things for a living, and I just can't get stuck on a year-old desktop. A lot of people don't have that problem, and at that point, Debian 12 will have a newer desktop than Pop! OS. Yeah, when you're behind Debian stable for your desktop environment, you're not exactly current. So, in the end, Debian 12 is a solid choice for a desktop, especially if you're not always running after the latest thing. And this comes with the benefit of rock-solid stability, because these desktop versions have been tested and fixed over the course of months, which means that you're very unlikely to encounter a desktop-breaking bug. And of course, Debian 12 also updates virtually every single package and app they ship. You get the LTS kernel version 6.1, and you get the Mesa drivers 22.3 and the NVIDIA drivers 525. This is all enough to run on any computer, old or new, although you will be missing out on a few performance improvements in the AMD and NVIDIA drivers. The default apps also got a version bump, but they're not all up to their latest versions. LibreOffice, for example, is only at version 7.4, and Firefox is version 102 ESR, which is the stable extended support version of Firefox. But this isn't really an issue anymore either, because you can install Flatpak, snaps, or app images on Debian 12, which actually ships an up-to-date version of Flatpak, contrary to Debian 11, which had a very old version, which meant that some apps would not run all that well. This means that if you do need the very latest version of an app, you can install it without compromising your system or having to add a weird repo that will call dependency hell on your system. And all the underlying packages also received updates like systemd, OpenSSH, Python 3, GCC, and generally all the stuff you would need to develop anything or to run a server. All in all, 67% of packages were updated from Debian 11, and the repos now include 11,000 new packages as well, for a total of more than 64,000, which means chances are you will find anything you need in the Debian repos, at a recent enough version that you won't face any issue. And with that stable base, plus the giant repos and Flatpak, app images, or snap support, you'll be able to install virtually anything you want, which makes Debian 12 a pretty solid choice. Of course, Debian 12 is not a desktop for everyone. If your use case is, I like using the very latest thing, then obviously it is not for you. Use something like Arch, Gentoo, or even the latest non-LTS release of Ubuntu, or even Fedora. Now, for me personally, Debian 12 will not be suitable for my desktop, because I like to, and I sort of need to, use the very latest desktop environments. Unless you want me to make videos about year-old desktops. If you want the most beginner-friendly distro, while Debian isn't a bad choice, seeing as it will be super stable, and you now have easier support for a lot more hardware out of the box, it's also not the easiest. The installer looks pretty old and isn't as intuitive as other options, and you will still need to enable a few things manually, like FlatHub, Flatpak, potential NVIDIA drivers, and the like. Something like Ubuntu or Mint will probably be a better choice for a complete Linux beginner, and they will also be pretty stable, although not as stable as Debian 12. And of course, if you want to game on Linux, Debian will also not be your first choice. While you can install Steam easily if you enable the non-free repo, you will not have the latest drivers and kernel, which generally include important performance improvements and better Vulkan support, which is the backbone of Linux gaming. Debian isn't entirely unsuitable for gaming, but it's also not your best choice. There's a reason why SteamOS uses Arch as a base. Linux gaming is a very fast evolving space, and it means that with each small updates you can get major performance improvements and major compatibility improvements as well. So, in the past, I would never have recommended Debian Stable as a desktop for most users. It was too old, too outdated, the older apps in its repos were just not a good experience, and Flatpak was not super well supported. Older desktop environments were also lackluster, as each new release brought some crucial improvements that you really could not do without. But nowadays, I'd say Debian Stable is a strong choice for your desktop. With the maturity of formats like Flatpak, snaps, or app images, you don't have to care about what versions of apps are in your repos. If you need something newer, you can get it without adding a third-party repo that will mess up your system's dependencies and shared libraries. And desktop environments on Linux are now very mature, which means using a 6-month to 2-year-old desktop isn't necessarily a deal breaker anymore. And of course, Debian Stable is not for everyone. If you're a tinkerer, an enthusiast, a hobbyist, or a gamer, it probably will not be your first choice. But for anyone who wants a workstation that works reliably day after day without any breakage, without any weird stuff going wrong after a reboot, even though you did nothing, Debian Stable is the absolute best choice you can make. In terms of combining stability, software availability, and now hardware support, nothing comes close. And nothing comes close to this segue, to our sponsor. If you're tired of tinkering with your computers, laptops or desktops because they were never made to run Linux, they were made to run Windows, then there's an easy fix. Click the link in the description below and take a look at the huge range of devices that Tuxedo offers. They make laptops and desktops that run Linux out of the box. All the parts are picked specifically because they're Linux compatible. They have devices for every need and every price point, whether you're looking for a laptop, a desktop, a gaming device, a workstation, something affordable, something super powerful, you decide. They're all very customizable. All their laptops are openable, repairable, and upgradable, and they're based in Germany, but they ship to most countries in the world. So, if you're due for a PC replacement and you plan to run Linux on that new machine, click the link in the description below and give a shot to Tuxedo. So, thanks everyone for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't hesitate to like, to subscribe, to turn on notifications, to write a comment. And if you didn't like it, well, there's always that thumbs down button, and you can tell me why in the comments below. And if you really enjoy the channel, there are plenty of links in the description as well to let you support it with LiberaPay, PayPal, Patreon, YouTube memberships, YouTube thanks. You know how this works. So, thanks everyone for watching, and I guess you'll see me in the next one. Bye!